If you're organizing events and you have ever thought about working with an aerialist, then you for sure already heard the word rigging, and maybe you thought, oh shit, that sounds very, very complicated, because suddenly everyone starts to talk about carabiner, safety factors, working load limit, truss, and so on. And it sounds like you need an engineering degree just to be able to put a show on stage. And it's not that complicated. I really can feel you. I felt the same when I started with aerial acrobatics. And I'm not a rigger. I'm not going to explain you how to exactly rig something, but I want to explain you how the principle of rigging works and how you can find out what you know or maybe what you do not know and what are the worst mistakes. So imagine a museum with a huge glass artwork which is worth millions of dollars. Everybody looks at the artwork and nobody thinks about the system which is holding it in place. All the little screws, the tiny wires, and the way it's fixed to the ceiling. People just trust that it's working. And the same goes with rigging for aerial acrobatics. People see the show, but they never look up there and see what is actually holding the performer in place. And rigging is the system which connects the performer to the ceiling. Now, of course, people are very carefully before going up into the air, because imagine if this artwork would fall down, then you would lose lots of money. But if a performer falls down, then people would get injured. If you think that rigging is the system which connects the performer to the ceiling, you first have the apparatus, which could be, for example, an aerial hoop. Then you have, for example, in this case, a round sling, a carabiner, a swivel, another carabiner, another round sling, and then it would connect the hoop to a truss, and the performer would hang from that truss in the end. This is like a chain. So if one link of the chain is weak, the whole chain breaks. That's why you need to make sure that every part is working well. For example, if the beam is safe, but you use the wrong carabiner, the safe beam will not help you anything. Same goes if you have the right carabiner and you have an amazing round sling, but then you put it around something which has a very sharp edge, so it cuts into the round sling, then you're also not safe. So you really need to understand every little part of the rigging system to make sure that everything is fine. And I think that's where people get intimidated, because there are so many things which you could do wrong. But rigging is not that difficult. It's just important to understand that small details matter more than you would think. So where can you actually hang an aerial performer? Some venues already have a rigging point installed, and sometimes you can rig from a truss or from a beam. But I would never trust a new rigging point to be safe just because it looks safe, because to really know that a beam holds enough weight for an aerial performance, you would need a structural engineer or plans of the building. For a lot of events, especially outdoor events or venues without rigging point, there's something else which I really like. It's a freestanding rig. So a freestanding rig is basically a portable structure which creates an own rigging point. And you can take it apart, you can transport it in a car and sometimes even in a plane. And the good thing is that the setup is really fast. It usually takes less than an hour. And for those rigs, you don't even need any anchor points in the floor. You just need enough space. So the next question is a question I hear a lot. It's how strong does a rigging point have to be for an aerial performance? And you often see numbers like 500 kilos or more likely 1000 kilos in the rider of an aerial performance. But there is no exact number. It depends really on every act. And an aerial performer is not just dead weight hanging from somewhere, because we climb, we spin, and mostly we make drops. So these drops create an impact, a dynamic force, which is much stronger than our body weight. So you always have to calculate this factor in. And this is why you cannot say, okay, a performer weighs 70 kilos, so it's enough if the point holds 100 kilos. So instead, professionals look into the biggest force an act can create, and then they add a safety factor into it. That's where you have the words braking load and working load limit. Don't worry so much about these names. The principle is simple. Braking load is the load where an equipment breaks, and working load limit is the maximum weight which a piece of equipment can safely hold. But remember that we are human beings, we are not just a piece of equipment. So there is also a safety factor which we add because we are not just a piece of stone or something, we are humans. As an event organizer, you don't need to calculate those numbers yourself. You just should understand that the rigging point has to hold the weight of a performer multiple times. Now let's talk about the equipment itself. If you ever looked into aerial equipment, you probably have seen that there are many different types of carabiners. There are those screw gate carabiners, there are automatic locking carabiners, and there are also shackles and maillons. Which carabiner is the right one depends completely on the act. Personally, I like automatic locking carabiners because then you don't have to remember to close the screw. There's also lots of questions about mixing steel and aluminium. And the thing is, yes, you can mix it, but the thing is that the aluminium is a softer metal, so it gets worn out much more easier if it's connected to a piece of steel. So it's extra important to always check the equipment to see if it's already worn out, if it's changing a bit the shape or something, and replaces it if needed. Something I would never recommend is to buy safety equipment from random online marketplaces just because it's cheap. If someone is hanging on this piece of equipment, I want to know exactly who made it. I want to have the number of the manufacturer on the piece of equipment, and I want to have the number of the piece of equipment so I could exactly trace where it comes from if anything would be wrong. And I want to buy equipment from a trusted manufacturer and from a trusted reseller. So manufacturer would be, for example, Rock Exotica or Petzl. Reseller would be a shop which sells climbing equipment or rigging equipment, not just any random online shop. And the cheapest option isn't the best in the end, because even if there would not be an accident, but you would buy cheap equipment for your venue, and then a performer arrives and checks it and says, hey, sorry, I don't feel safe to perform there, which would be perfectly normal and actually very professional from a performer's standpoint, then you paid it twice. Another thing which is important is to not throw the equipment on the floor or not let it fall on the floor, and regularly inspect it if it looks worn out, if it has scratches on the surface, if it closes properly, the carabiners, and if it spins properly if you have a swivel. And for the round slings, it's important to not store them at a humid location and to inspect the surfaces if they are still good or if they look worn out. So before we finish, I still want to talk about two things which are really important. First thing is electric winches. Sometimes people find electric winches online which can lift a few hundreds of kilos or even thousands of kilos and say, hey, that's cool. If this winch is holding so much, it must be perfect for holding an aerialist. But unfortunately, it's not true because those electric winches are not made for human load. Because imagine aerialists run around and fly in circles, they spin, they do dynamic drops, and these winches are not made for that. Also, sometimes they don't have a double braking system, which means if one thing fails, the performer is going down, and also the cable doesn't roll up smoothly. So it's actually super dangerous to use these winches for aerial performance. And it's a budgeting question, of course. And sometimes a performer flying winch is too much money. But what you can always use is a pulley system, which where you pull the performer manually with a mechanical advantage, and it can look quite good. Even bigger shows use it. So if in doubt, use a pulley system. You save yourself so much stress about the winch. And if you already know about winches and performer flying winches, you're probably not even watching this video. And another popular question is trees. Can you hang from a tree? Yes or no? So sometimes people hang from trees, but it's very important to understand that you do not know how strong a tree really is, because maybe the tree looks good, but beneath the wood is already old. So it's actually very dangerous to rig from trees when you're not a person who really knows a lot about trees. And something which I'm thinking is very important to understand: if a performer comes and asks a lot of questions about the rigging, they are not trying to be difficult, and it's actually a good sign, because it means that they know enough to ask questions. They are just trying to understand the system which they are trusting their life with. And a performance looks much better if the performer is relaxed and can actually concentrate on the audience, on the situation, on the performance, and not thinking about, oh shit, is the rigging point actually safe, or am I doing something stupid and dangerous? So it's good for everyone to have good communication about the rigging situation before the performance. And that's really the main message of the whole video I'm doing. I want to tell you, rigging is not that crazy complicated. It's just some mathematics and understanding the basics about the equipment you're working with. And then as an event organizer, you don't need to do all these calculations about how much impact an aerial act generates, because the aerialists themselves should know how much impact their act generates and how strong their rigging point has to be. It's just super important to take enough time for planning, for good communication, and in doubt, asking questions. So I hope the next time someone says, hey, we need to talk about the rigging, it doesn't sound scary or anything, but rather interesting and just like another part of putting together a good show or a great event.